Hello, book friends, and welcome back to another episode of Most Bookish. I am so happy to be here again with you guys talking about the books that I like, the books that maybe you like, the books that maybe you hate, because that might be what this episode is, but that are interesting and we should talk about them. And I want to talk about this one in particular so much with you guys. So I'm Amanda, in case you didn't know. Let's get into it, as they say. Today we're talking about Worthy by Jada Pinkett-Smith. It is her memoir that she just released this winter. I don't know, I'm not good with seasons because I live in Florida and we don't have any. This is the book. This is the front. On the back it says, "A queen is her own savior, her magic is quiet, potent and mysterious." Her face, it's made up of tiny pictures of her and her family. The artwork is just ridiculous. The inside is pictures of her family. I listened to this book on Audible, but I got the actually, I have another version. Oh, where is it? Okay, I'm back. I actually have two. And for people who hate this book, I'm sure that's way too many. But I went to the Miami Book Fair, which is amazing. You should very much check out. It's once a year at the Miami-Dade campus. They have all kinds of writers. It runs for a week from one Friday, Saturday to the next Sunday. Throughout that week, they have authors come and speak about their books, or they just have an interview. If the book or the author is well known enough, they're usually interviewed by a person. So for instance, Jada was interviewed by Lena Waithe, and Kerry Washington was interviewed by Eva Longoria. That's called their Conversations with series. So I guess it's somebody that's well known that's having a conversation with one of the authors at the fair. This year they celebrated their 40-year anniversary. Again, it's a great event. I was there for the Conversations with. Unfortunately, I was traveling for the actual fair. It's a street fair where they have books and they have music and they have food vendors. Again, if you have the chance, I'm gonna insert their Instagram page so you can look at some of that. And I have actually some video from when I was there because they had already started with the entertainment, even though it was the very start of the fair. But check them out. Go if you're here. There's so many things that people go to, but it's every November because they celebrate my birthday. Of course, it's a little problematic because I'm traveling a lot of times for my birthday. So I appreciate the gesture, but also it's a little inconvenient. Miami Book Fair. We have to talk about it. So I went to the Conversations with for Jada. You have the option when you sign up if you're going to do a copy of the book with the Conversations with or not. I chose a copy of the book having forgotten that I had already pre-ordered the book. Which is okay, because now I have the first edition that's signed. It's signed by Jada. Like I said, I read this on Audible. I never know how to say listen to. It just feels weird. The book itself is really beautiful, and it's red, a red theme going on. You see the red in the pages, you see the red on certain letters, and it goes on throughout the book. At the end of each chapter on the Audible version, she would posit a question based off of what she had talked about for herself, regarding herself, that maybe you could think about for you, that you could apply to you. And I think that it might have been a nod to the red table, but I think it was more that's kind of Will and Jada's vibe of, I want to learn more about all of these things. They've always been very curious in the way that they talk, the way that they've talked over the years about different things that they had been studying or learning about, and sharing that knowledge with people is kind of on brand in general for her. I didn't get to see what it looked like because I was listening in my car. But when I looked in the book, this is what each one of those questions for you looks like. It's got the red piping, and it's just an interesting break throughout all of this. I don't know. I think it was really nice. That's what the book looks like. Let's talk about what the book is about. We're gonna rewind a little bit. Before Jada wrote this book, actually a couple of years ago, Will wrote this book. The whole world has been wanting to know the truth about these people for 5 billion years. There have been so many speculation pieces, certain magazines, about a million things, about their personal romantic life, about entanglements before that became a word with other people, about how their kids were being raised, about how their kids were turning out, the comments on things that Jaden would wear or the way that Willow looked. This had gone on forever, and they had stayed quiet, and there were people who judged them for staying quiet. And then when they started talking, there were people who judged them for talking. The thing I will say that seems to be the case, and the reason why I bring up Will's book in Jada's video, is that if you had read Will's book like I did, I actually started reading it. I ended up listening to it on Audible instead. And when I tell you this is the best performed book I have ever listened to, because he reads it, and it's a musical. I don't know, it's a musical. I don't know what it is, but it's incredible. And if you don't like reading, but you've thought about audiobooks, this is the book that you want to read, because his history is so vast, and there's so many things. So you're just like listening if you're driving. I usually listen to Audible while I'm driving. So if you're driving, all of a sudden you're listening to a story about the beginning of his career, and then all of a sudden you're rapping a DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince song, or eventually singing the theme to Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Like, it's just such an incredible performance. The reading of the book was not anything out of the ordinary. The listening of the book, hands down, best audiobook I've ever listened to and seen. So I digress, as always. The point that I'm making is, if you read this book, you understand that the things that Will has done, the mistakes that he's made, the public mistakes that he's made, the issues that he struggled with, are not new, and they are not a result of any conversations that were had on the red table. Jade is not the mastermind. I'm getting ahead of myself. And we'll come back to this book. You realize that he has struggled for a long time, and the fault lines had already been beginning to show. You really only get a sense of that if you read this. It's also a really nice book. The jacket is, I don't know what kind of texture this is, but it's really appealing. It's got like kind of graffiti on the back, because you know his b-boy background, and it is his head too. I got this one from book tour that he went on for his book. He had like 5 events that he did, 5 live events, and I went to the one in Philadelphia because I had to. Like, I knew that that was going to be an event and that the crowd was going to be fantastic. Queen Latifah was his interviewer, and it was incredible. That also was around my birthday, and it was my birthday present to myself. And there was a girl who was next to me who was losing her mind the entire time. She was screaming. She loved him so much. It was so adorable. I had a spectacular time. Did I say that already? I really did. He performed at the end. Jazzy Jeff was there on the 1s and 2s. I just loved it. The interior of his book is not as artistic as hers, but he has little segments of pictures. Those are his parents. Him as a kid. First becomes our movie star when he marries Jada. You should read this one, but this is not what we're talking about. She was writing this back when Will was writing his. he was actually documenting his journey at that time for a docuseries on him that had to do with weight loss and I think kind of where he was in life. There was behind the scenes conversations with the family, and she was saying, well, you know, I'll get to do mine next or something like that. So this was all in the works before the entanglement, before the slap, before all those things. And it's a plane. I live next to an airport. You know what's so funny about that is that it sounds so loud to me, but there's so many times where I'll see a video and somebody's saying, oh, excuse the honking. It's like, I don't hear the honking. You didn't have to tell me about the honking. I wouldn't have known it was there. So I shouldn't tell you about the plane. But it sounds really loud to me. Worthy. There are some questions that I wanted answered that I felt were questions I had based on the things I had seen publicly in response to either her or things that had happened. I hope that I answer those questions for you in this video. And those questions are: 1, is she the bad guy? 2 is a twofold question. Why does everybody hate her? Or why does everybody blame her? And by everybody, I mean all of her detractors, because obviously everybody doesn't. I'm gonna insert a clip here of all of the people who came to that book fair event. The line was around several corners. It was primarily women of color, and those are primarily the people who I feel like have supported her no matter what. The book event Lena Waithe focused on Jada's career history and her contribution to cinema and her standing as an iconic Black actress of the 90s.
You were able to sort of build this amazing career where you could show us that you were an actress in every sense of the word. So I'm just curious how much of it was happenstance and how much of it was your choices?
Well, it was a little bit of both, because during that particular era, we had a lot more choices. You know, it's what I call the golden era.
I would agree.
Yeah, and so I had the opportunity to be able to pick and choose certain projects, right? And it might be a project that Hallie is better for, you know what I mean? Or Nia, you know what I mean? Because we all went and auditioned for the same stuff.
Crazy.
But there would be certain things that I would target, you know, that I'd like, nope, that's for me. You know, and it just so happened that with Low Down Dirty Shame, Rosie Perez was supposed to play Peaches.
Okay, this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind you're not gonna get this elsewhere. Okay, you put that in the book.
Right now, Rosie Perez was supposed to play Peaches. And I remember Keenan, because I used to get on Keenan, like, I need to be a fly girl.
I love that he also saw your future though.
Yeah,
he was like, don't be over here doing that. You need to be, it's okay, J-Lo was over there, cool.
Right.
But he was like,
he was like, stay focused. You don't need to be a fly girl. Stay focused. So when Rosie Perez dropped out, he said, come to my office. I wanna talk to you about this project. And because Keenan and I were friends, and he knew me for a long time, he knew my comedy. You know, he knew all of those nuances about me, and he knew how to bring the funny out of me, right? And so I did a couple of scenes, and he was like, "You gonna be Peaches." Yeah.
And I feel like so much of that gets lost in a lot of this. I will preface this by saying, I loved Jada, and I still do. I loved her in A Different World. I loved A Different World. That was a huge show for me growing up. I loved Lena James. I loved Tupac's cameo. I loved Set It Off. I loved Menace to Society. She was just dope. She wasn't sexualized. She wasn't a caricature. She was just a really dope girl. There were so many young women like that at that time. You wanted to be like. You wanted to wear whatever you wanted to wear, baggy clothes that weren't revealing. You wanted to wear your combat boots. You wanted to be cute sometimes, but whatever you wanted to be, it was whatever you felt like being. It was not for somebody else. And she was of that time where women kind of showed up in that way. They were strong, they were powerful, they were dynamic and multi-talented. I love that women are empowered in their sexuality these days, and I love all of the actresses and singers and rappers that are doing it today and how they show up, and I think they're glamorous and gorgeous. This was just a different vibe, and she was a huge part of that. And to pretend like she wasn't just isn't fair. So I'll leave that there. And again, back to the questions that I'm going to answer, or I hope that I answer. So that was number 2. Number 3, did a lot of these feelings start with the red table, or were they prior to? And number 4, for those people that she did so, what image of Will did Jada destroy? So I will leave you there, and we will start talking about Worthy. She has said the title of the book is Worthy because she herself has struggled with feeling worthy as a woman, as a person with her background. So getting into her background, the setting of the book begins in Baltimore, where she's born, or really it's in Baltimore for majority of the first half up until she's an adult. Her mother is a teenage mother, as most people know if they ever watched The Red Table. Gammy is a character, or not a character. She's a beloved public figure at this point from things that she said on that show. She has a huge following on Instagram, and she's one of the trio from Red Table Talk, which was Willow, the granddaughter, Jada, the daughter, and then Gammy, who's the grandmother in that group. She's known as Gammy because that's what Willow calls her. But her real name is Adrienne. Well, today it's Adrienne Banfield Norahs. She was a teenage mom. The story starts out in Jada's grandparents' house, and a majority of the beginning of her life is spent with her grandparents. So many of us who grew up with parents who weren't technically ready to be parents when they had their kids, you probably have beloved grandparents who participated a lot in your upbringing. So that's basically the case with Jada. She has a grandmother on one side that was very influential to her, a grandfather on the other. They were successful, again, middle class. The grandfather was a surgeon. She had a grandmother who was a socialite. She didn't struggle so much in her early childhood because she thankfully had those people there protecting her. But as she got older and her mother became a nurse and took over care for her, and they moved away from their grandparents, she then deals with a succession of hardships in her life with her mom because her mom is an addict. And Adrienne has talked about this publicly several times. They talked about it on the Red Table. They've had a lot of healing around it, but she was a heroin addict for a lot of years, as was Jada's father. And she was a functioning addict, so she would be a nurse and go to work and be doing drugs, and Jada would be, I think it's called a latchkey kid, one of the lost kids where your parents either not home or they're not paying attention to you. In the course of those years, when Adrienne's dating different people who aren't the best or not making the best decisions, Jada's off living her own life as a teenager in Baltimore, where there are plenty of troubles that she can get herself into, which includes hanging out with people who are stealing cars or doing drugs or dealing drugs. And at some point she starts dealing drugs, and she's a very inept dealer who eventually gets robbed and has the scare of her life, and she gets told she needs to get out of that life. That's kind of one of the impetuses that get her out of Baltimore and moving further in her acting career. She has always been active in the arts. She has danced, she has performed, she's been in plays. She was going to a very well-known performing arts school, which is where she met Tupac. This is kind of where the beginning of her story with Tupac starts to come into her memoir. And what's interesting about it is that I didn't realize what good friends they were when they were younger. There was always this vibe about them as adults that was like, were they really involved? Were they not involved? But I didn't realize, one, how young they were when they were friends, and two, the circumstances in which they became and stayed friends. They were young, they were struggling, they both had parents with substance abuse problems, and they were just best friends. And the way that she tells the story, you really get the sense that they were best friends, but that's it. All the weird stuff that people have insinuated sounds really strange when put next to the way this narrative reads.
So the fact that God made it that we could only be friends, because there was no chemistry between us.
Right.
You know?
Not in that way.
Not in that way, but there was a beautiful, it was such a beautiful, amazing, and he was the first male friend that I had in that way. I learned male friendship through my relationship with Pop.
Wow.
So moving on in her geographical setting, she eventually leaves Baltimore to go to college, which her mother had wanted her to go to. She goes to performing arts program. She gets accepted into one, but she realizes, I think after a year, that this is not it, and she wants to go to LA, which is where Tupac has already gone. So you start to really see a kind of network of artists in this beginning of her adult life. Kids who were in the program with them, people that they had gone to New York with to try to find work, to see if they could really make something with this life that they had chosen, and how over and over again, when one of them finds a place that has opportunities, they, I don't want to say bring the other ones out, but they support each other in different ways that helps them get to the next thing. While her most prominent relationship and well known that did this was her relationship with Tupac, it was by no means the only one. It was just really the only one that anybody was interested in, because it happened, like I said, with different people. So she gets to LA where Tupac is doing things with Digital Underground. She takes the chance of capturing this moment that he's seeing out there of young Black Hollywood. There are opportunities. Come and try and see what you can do. And she starts auditioning and starts getting roles and starts becoming a part of the lexicon that we eventually would know her for. She has a really interesting story with Debbie Allen where she went to interview for a guest appearance of a girl who has AIDS, who eventually is taken by Tisha Campbell, but Jada had gone and auditioned for it. In talking with Debbie Allen, and Debbie Allen getting to know her, she basically told her, this is not the role for you. I'm not hiring you for this, but I'm going to bring you on as a regular, and I'm going to write a story around your actual story. So Lena James gets born, and she does a phenomenal job of playing that character. It revamps the new generation coming into Hillman College and gives you a whole new group of storylines where she gets to play this kind of seminal character that she will repeat throughout, I feel like, her career of, I am so incredibly vulnerable on the inside, but I am tough on the outside, and I'm tiny, but I will fight you. So she goes from that to creating relationships in this kind of heyday of 90s Black Hollywood that help her move from role to role and get mentored by people like Eddie Murphy and Keenan Ivory Wayans. And she gets amazing opportunities like playing in The Nutty Professor when Eddie Murphy played himself 74 times, which was an amazing performance. She got to be in an amazing ensemble cast and Set It Off, which I don't even know if stuff like that exists for women today. Like, they were badass and they were gonna rob you. And interwoven in all of that is tidbits about how her relationship with Pac was going at the time, because while she was in this really formative time for Black Hollywood and has a lot of really amazing stories to share about this time, at the same time there was a really crazy situation going on with Tupac that the world knew about, but we didn't really understand the ins and outs of what was going on. And she gives a bit of context to that. I don't know if we find out all of the gory details, because she doesn't do that to him, even if she knows it. But you get a kind of context around how many people really cared about him and the type of person that he was trying to be, how politically active he was from when he was younger, how vulnerable he was because of having grown up with nothing and having a parent who was on drugs and having been sucked into this life that took over control and made him a version of himself that was very different than the one that Jada had known when they were kids, so much so that not long before he dies, they have an argument of, I don't even know you. It's kind of like what the hell are you doing? Get your head out of your ass. And he wasn't trying to hear that. So in that mix, she's also dealing with mental health issues. She has unresolved stuff from her childhood that she just kind of put on this Batman armor and didn't ever resolve any of that, like so many of us don't. You also start to see her development of other friendships in Hollywood with Dwayne Martin, who eventually is kind of the catalyst for the first real date, I guess you could say, that she has with Will. And that relationship with Will is developing during the timeline where Tupac is becoming East Coast, West Coast thug life, and things are accelerating. From the way that it's written, they're friends, but they don't really have anything to do with each other's lives outside of occasionally. He's gone his route with so many other women. She's never been interested in him in a romantic way when they were younger because they were such good friends. I think that they had a kiss and she was like, yuck. For the rest of their relationship, she was the homegirl that would talk to the girls for him and fix things for him and try to help him out in his many loves that he had over the years. The only time he seriously, again, approaches some kind of romantic idea with her is when he's in jail after the rape charge, and she's one of the only people that shows up for him, and he's in a vulnerable state, and he's like, maybe it was you all along, and she's like, I don't think so, man. And it doesn't happen. At that time, she's already starting to have dealings with Will anyways, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. The whole narrative of her kind of like, I guess, having been in love with Pac in some way and not really wanting to choose Will, if you read his book and you read her book, is absolute trash. If you read their books and you believe their books, right? We're going to say that. The stories that she recounts and the ways that she was trying to win Will and impress him, make herself look a fool to show how much she wanted to be with him, does not tally with this version of her that we've chosen to believe. She tells this embarrassing story of having made Will mad. He walks away. They're in a house together. He walks away to the outside of the house, wants nothing to do with her. She's a bit drunk. She decides that she's gonna like jump off the roof into the pool and yell out, "I love you, Will," to show this like overblown romantic action, which she knows is ridiculous because she's drunk, but he starts laughing. Everything is reconciled. It is again, if you read his book, another example of how he is the dominant person in this relationship. He has been the dominant person in all of his relationships. His recounting of his relationship with his ex-wife, the things that he had said to her. He is a jackass. I love Will, and I'm always going to love Will, and nothing's ever going to change that. But he runs that show. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it. If you want to argue with my opinion, do it. Before you come argue with me, you better go read those books, because I don't want to hear about so-and-so said on the internet. That's all I gotta say. So, back to setting. She ends up telling Pac that she will marry him. She spends her life with Will. They have the life together. She gets pregnant with Jaden. Her family and Will and his family want them to get married. She's not a traditionalist, and she's said multiple times that her examples of marriage at that time had been her mom's drug-filled marriage with her dad, obviously not successful, and then her grandparents' marriages, which were long-term marriages, but she said based on those examples, she doesn't know if marriage is what happiness is. I take from that her grandparents' marriages were, given the time and place, traditional, not always easy. You spend 50, 60 years with somebody and you're bound to probably have done some ugly things to each other. And maybe, especially again, given time and place, she had seen some stuff that her grandmothers had put up with that she didn't necessarily want to put up with. That's my assumption, because she doesn't get into it beyond those were her examples, and she doesn't know if marriage is what makes somebody happy. But she loves Will a lot. She's having a baby, and this is what the families want, so she does it. It's not that she didn't love him. It's not that she didn't want to marry him. It's that marriage does not seem like it's the happiest option. And if you ask Oprah, she might have been right. So they get married. They have the kids. The majority of the rest of the story is a lot of what we already know. The kids grow up. Willow comes along a couple years after Jaden. They assimilate this family with Will's older son, Trey. They're this beautiful, happy family. The kids grow up to be talented and wonderful. They get into music and acting and have their family struggles like any other family. What you don't know is happening throughout this story is that as she and Will are living this life, Jada's mental health is deteriorating over the years because she's never really addressed it. And because life is happening and life is hard. At some point, Will's on this crazy fueled trajectory that makes him the biggest movie star in the world. The way that he wants to live that life and take that ride isn't necessarily the way that she had pictured her life. So that becomes a stressor as well, but the majority of what she says around her mental health is really about her, and again, unresolved things that she hadn't dealt with throughout her life, to where she gets to a point where she's suicidal, fantasizing about different ways that she could possibly kill herself. In the end, her son Jaden tells her about this friend's father that he knows that did ayahuasca. He was talking about how great it was, and Mom, come and talk to him because I know that you're into alternative medicine and learning different things. She goes, has a conversation with this guy. He looks like a wholly transformed person. She had known him before, and he just looks like he's so much happier, and the things that he's saying sound like what she needs. And she decides that she's going to go all in and go on these ayahuasca journeys. She does several of them. It ends up changing her life. She finds a freedom that she hadn't before and deals with her unresolved stuff within these journeys with the guides that help her through the process. She kind of finishes out the memoir very briefly, addressing the stuff in the media. The majority of this story is her story becoming Jada Pinkett, becoming a famous movie star, her relationships with different people in the industry as it evolved, that included her relationship with Tupac, how they became known names in this world together, the different roles that she got to play, and some information on those different movies and how that went for her, and what it was like being a mom. She does touch on it somewhere in there that she and Will had come to an agreement based off of her fears that she would be left someday because of how his career was developing and the amount of temptation and women and things that he was exposed to. And within that fear, she decided, or they decided, that They wouldn't have an open marriage, but they would be open to each other, coming to one another about temptations that they had to pursue something with somebody else, and that they would decide together if that was something that they should do. She doesn't get into further detail about that, but she kind of leaves it there. Like, it's not what you thought, but I decided that I had to let go in order to preserve my union. Again, another marker of how much she does love him, and the fear of loss, I don't think goes both ways. But again, that's just my assumption. So anyways, the majority of the story isn't about the intricate inner workings of her marriage with Will. It's about how her life has gone. And it's a cool look into Black Hollywood at that time, which for a lot of people, it was such an amazing time for cinema, for TV shows. You had The Fresh Prince, you had Family Matters, you had Martin, you had Menace to Society, you had Set It Off, you had Dead Presidents, you had Love Jones, you had Boys in the Hood, you had Baps, you had the heyday of R&B, you had Aaliyah, you had TLC, you had Silk, Genuine, Missy Elliott. Like, it was a time. And that you got a story of somebody who was so involved in this time is spectacular. At the very, very end, she addresses the slap. She basically says it wasn't even about her. It wasn't even about that moment, that Will and Chris have some kind of BS that has gone on for years that's from a bajillion years ago. That was just the culmination of it. She doesn't get into whatever the origination of it was between those two. She says to avoid 400 million lawyer situations, but it has nothing to do with her. And she didn't even know what was actually going on at the time. She does do this whole side note of how Chris had asked her out, mistakenly thinking that her and Will were separating at some point. But outside of that, she doesn't tell any other stories about Chris. And in fact had said she had a great relationship with him before they had been on Madagascar together. And she really got to know him as a person. And she hopes that at some point this can be rectified between them all. The entanglement. Because I didn't want to oppose Will publicly, in my codependent way, I took the blame and played the pleasing and appeasing role I knew so well. She goes on to say in a different paragraph, no matter what, I was not going to throw anybody under the red table but myself, even if it meant wearing the scarlet letter. By the end of the conversation, she regained some of her power when he jokingly, but not jokingly, says, I'm gonna get you back. And she checks him, knowing all the things that he's done as well, and that he knew about all this, and that this was all in agreement with them. And she's like, you're gonna get me back? I think you've got me back. We're good on that. After having played it back and seeing how badly it plays, she could have decided they could have never released it, and they could have left it at that and never said anything. But she felt like, as part of her journey, as part of her healing, this is what she needed to do. She says today, does she regret it? Yes and no. Yes, she could have done it differently and been a bit more prepared for how the conversation could have taken a turn. But no, because everything that happened basically was supposed to happen, and she was supposed to have learned those lessons. At the end of that chapter, she talks about a dream that she has where she's talking to Will, and she basically says, why would you do that to me? Why would you make it seem like it was like that? And his response is, but the question is, why would you do that to yourself? And she transforms into this giant werewolf and chomps his head off, and then it kicks his pinky somewhere. And after she woke up and thought about it, she started laughing to herself, like, why'd I have to kick his pinky like that? It's funny because when you're in a long-term relationship with anybody, not even one anywhere near as complicated as theirs, or let me take that back, because you know what? If you really look at all of our internal long-term relationship lives, they're complicated. And if you want to pretend like you haven't put up with or done things that make you cringe today, we're going to not talk about it, because we know that's not true. But either way, you're with somebody long term, and there are some days where you just hate their guts. You want to beat them up. You want to punch him in the face, but you still love him. So it was funny. And then she goes on to kind of break down why a pinky finger, or why, you know, and she gets into this whole conversation about spirituality and more of the journey that she's on. And that would probably be, for me, the only thing, or the only times where she lost me a little bit. It was a little too much of that. It was Thich Nhat Hanh and some of how deeply she delves into some of these topics, like with the ayahuasca, that I don't know if I personally care so much about those topics. If I did, I would look into them myself. I don't know if I really want that or so much of it in a story about her. Maybe an explanation about what those things are, but light surface explanation. So who is the hero of this story? The hero. I think it's Jada. Your hero is going to be some version of your author. When she was young, she was a much more fierce protector of herself, I guess, in certain ways. She was always a bit vulnerable. She was always a bit more vulnerable than I wanted her to be at times. I wanted her to be the version of herself that she plays so often on screen. And I think that that's where the big problem a lot of times comes in, that we think that that's her. We think she is the person she plays on screen. We think Will is who he plays on screen. And she is not Fish Mooney. She is not any of those people, although she plays them very well. And he's not Hitch. He's not Hancock. He's not Willie from Philly. He is Willie from Philly, but he's not. And we conflate the two. She struggles much more with saving herself as she goes on her journey into this life with Will, into this life in Hollywood, into this life where she puts others before herself and does not address the things that she should have addressed when she was younger. She thinks that if she gives up herself, then these people that she's giving up herself for are going to be the ones to save her. And it just doesn't work like that. The ayahuasca ceremonies, as much as I probably learned more than I wanted to, the vehicles I think that she uses to get back to herself so that she can then save herself. I don't think it's the ayahuasca that saves her. I think that at the end of the day, she had to find Jada. After that, she talks about a time period that she spent with her mom when she needed to get out of the familial home. She needed to continue on that journey of healing herself. She thought that she was healing things about her relationship with Will. Unbeknownst to her, she ended up healing old things about her relationship with her mother. That for the first time, she was in her mother's house and she felt safe in her mother's house. And how it was such a gift for her to be able to have this moment with her mom. How it was a gift to her mom and to herself. And how so many times we can think that we're healing one thing and we're actually healing something entirely different.
At 40-some years old, I think I was like 48, returning home to my mother's house was the first time I felt safe in her house. So you want to talk about a deep healing, right? I was like, wow, I never in a million years was like, I'm going to return home to my mother's house. I'm 48. I got kids of my own, they're grown as hell, you know, and going back to my mother's house and posting up in her, taking one of her bedrooms as my own and living with my mother as her child. And the healing, you know, it just put a button on it.
So, who's the villain then? Since there's a hero, yes, there must be a villain. I think that the villain is this idea of who we believe her to be, this person that she's portrayed in so many roles that she's had, that she is super dominant, she is the commander in the Matrix, she is Fish Mooney in Batman, she is strong-willed, indestructible woman who is clearly at the reins of everything that happens. And it obscures who Will actually is. It obscures his pettiness. It obscures his insecurities. And everything negative that we find out about him is somehow gone back to her and her puppet masterwork. Could she have done this differently? Could they both have done it differently? Could they have revealed less? Could they have stayed quiet forever? Of course. That doesn't necessarily stop things from happening. Nobody made August have that conversation. I don't think that it's that simple. And to pretend like it is, I think, is untrue. And I will say also from, again, if you read his book, you read her book, and you listen to their genuine interviews, not the ones where the interviewers are like, so Jada, tell me. No, like people who are actually sitting down and talking to them and them talking back. If you listen, you will hear that they don't seem to really care what people think. People think that Will's situation escalated to the point that it did because of all of this defaming of him and this mockery of him that has happened with different things coming out. If you read his book, I'm going to keep saying that, you will realize that he has felt like a coward his whole life. And he has done crazy things his whole life because of those feelings of having been an abused boy who couldn't stand up to his father and stop him from abusing his siblings or his mother because he was the oldest. And he felt like that was what he was supposed to have done, but he was too scared to do it. He turned to comedy instead, made his dad happy so that he would be less violent. And that saved his mom and his siblings in ways that he probably wasn't aware of. It still made him feel like a coward. And there are different stories that he tells in his books where he was with friends and like threatening people and just doing stupid stuff because of, well, you ain't gonna play with me now. I'm big and I'm Will, and and this whole idea that he's still trying to run from, which he talks about in depth over time, over and over again. And so many times he's tried to say that it's not fair that Jada's getting the blame, because it's not. And so in every interview, and the people, instead of people listening to that, they take that as him trying to defend her again and hide things for her, when it's not true. When there's only so many ways these people can tell you he's also imperfect. And it has bled out multiple times. And actually, if you look at outbursts or things that have happened or crazy revelations that have been made, they've never come from Jada up until when she wrote this memoir. And she said they've been separated for longer than everybody thinks they have. But I don't think that that's crazy. Like, everybody knew that there were issues there, and however they were choosing to live separately, I don't think it's as salacious as people try to paint it. I also think she's a bit of the villain at times because of her lack of self-worth and self-esteem and not standing up in her power as much as she should have, especially during these times where she's so busy protecting other people that she becomes a target. And I don't just mean that in a public way. I also mean, again, privately, she has not done a good job of taking care of herself when she needed to. So what's the overall story? What's the overall plot? I think that it's a young girl from Baltimore who had a rough upbringing, who uses art and her own personal gifts to get herself out of the circumstances that she's grown up around, to the things that she's been attracted to, of street life that isn't going to serve her as an adult, finds success in Hollywood by using that original core of bravado that she did to get herself out of there. And it made her wildly successful to the point where the two have blended, and where the image ends and the real Jada begins has been something that she's struggled to try to find her way back to. She's always been, and this goes back to her character of Lena James, and that there were moments with that character that were written so well around this massive vulnerability of not feeling like you belong in the room, not really knowing what you're doing, of having to be this adult when you're still figuring life out, gets hidden by this facade of strength. And it really just encapsulates so much of who Jada has been throughout her entire life. Go back to my questions. Is she the bad guy? I think that at times she's been the bad guy. I think that she's been a bad guy to herself primarily. And I think she's let herself be the bad guy because she hasn't stood in defense of herself. And you see it a lot in her interviews where she's kind of floundering and not really answering questions, because she starts to say, you don't know the truth. And then people are like, well, what's the truth? And she's like, ah, blah, blah, blah. So in that case, you know, I guess I would agree with people where if that's the case, then just don't say anything. It'd probably be more helpful. Why does everybody hate her? I was reading this book. I got this book actually when I traveled to Charlotte, North Carolina. It was on display and it turned out to be such a good book. It's an author who is talking about different authors over the years, and she needs to take a sabbatical, and she goes to different places where these authors took sabbaticals. And one of the authors that she talks about is James Joyce and his relationship with his wife, or who becomes his wife, Norah Barnacle. James Joyce was a very beloved author, and Norah has been seen as a positive or negative figure depending on where you sit in judgment. And she has this section that I found so applicable to the situation with Jada and Will, because it's like this dismantling of this idea of who Will is. Literally, I've had this conversation. He could go and run over 46 babies right now. And the conversation would be, Jada makes Will run over 46 babies. Doesn't matter how crazy he actually is. Doesn't matter that he's the one who did it. It would be her fault. So here's the part that I thought that it was so well written. This book is called The Dead Ladies Project. It's so good. It's by Jessa Crispin. In the chapter about Norah Barnacle, James Joyce's love, she says, consider the position of the wife. Unless the genius under consideration married late in his career and ended up with a fan or a secretary for a wife, as many creative male geniuses do, the genius marries a woman as a man, not as the divine being that we, the audience, worship and make our sacrifices to. The genius marries as a physical body who spills his tea, who gets a bit sloppy when he hits the gin, who when choosing between spending their last dollar on food or on paint will oftentimes choose paint. The audience is left out of that part of it. We see the output, not the intake. ... We see anything that does not facilitate that output as an obstacle. So we have mixed feelings about the wife. When she is muse, when she takes dictation, when she is the facilitator and the midwife, we love her. When she is the nag, ... we hate her. But all we see from the cheap seats is what we collectively decide to see. If our favorite artist was a rapist, a drunk, so on and so forth, we do a complicated emotional calculus to find a reason to keep their paintings on our museum walls and their books on our shelves. We can justify almost anything as long as we still get access to that life-changing work. But the wife, if she becomes a hindrance, ... that we cannot forgive. Norah's great crime, insert Wives of History, was that she did not fall in love with James Joyce the genius. She fell in love with James Joyce the man. And I am going to leave it there. Because I don't think it can get any better than that. I think that answers whether it started at the red table. I think that answers what image of Will did she destroy. That is not to say that everything that they've said or however they've presented everything is 100 factual. I'm not stupid enough to believe that. What I'm saying is there's a lot of conversations that go on that reference nothing. Like, there are people who have said, I'm not reading that book. It's a horrible book. None of you guys should read it. But you didn't read it. So how do you know it's a horrible book? You sound crazy. You want her to be the bad guy. You want her to be the bad guy because Will can't be the bad guy because he's so important to you. And he is so important. I love him regardless. It's messed up what he did. I'm not even going to get into the whole slap thing. As an important part of my growing up, he has meant so much to me, and he always will, as flawed as he is. If he runs over the babies, I might have to draw the line. But hitting Chris Rock, I don't know. At the end of the day, I think that they had been saying things about her since forever ago. They'd been saying things about both of them since forever ago. Back to the Scientology, back to their relationship with Tom Cruise. I mean, so many different, I could talk for 400 hours, but going back to Worthy, is it a book that you should read? If you want to hear about Jada Pinkett-Smith's life story, read this book. If you want to hear about young Black Hollywood in the 90s, read this book. If you want to hear about friendships through life that sustain you and bring you to the next level in your life and a coming together of people to support you, read this book. If you want to know a bit more about ayahuasca or Thich Nhat Hanh or spirituality in general, read this book. If it doesn't matter, if you read 5,000 books and had a reality show that showed you all the truths, that you are going to hate this woman no matter what, don't read this book. Don't watch this video. I don't even know why you're here. I appreciate you though, but don't read this book. If you love Will and want some really great stories about all of the movies that he did in his life and his crazy career and the way that he thought and how he actually planned out his success and then executed that plan, read this book. Maybe don't read the book. Listen to the audiobook. Fantastic. Reading the book, I don't know. Audiobook. Do it. I'm going to give, I'm not going to rate him because technically this is not his video. And I'm sorry, Jada. I'm sure that happens to you so often. I am going to give this book, I'm going to give this book 3 pandas. I liked the story. I appreciate what she was trying to do. She wasn't, her and her ghostwriter, whoever helped her write this, were not the most fantastic writers in the universe. Her performance of this book was very good, but I've heard better. Overall, it's a good book. You should read it for all the reasons that I told you, but I wouldn't do anything beyond 3 pandas because it wasn't like, oh my God, this changed my life. Again, this isn't Will's video, but I did say his Audible version of his is the best memoir I've read on Audible, the best performance I've heard on Audible of any type of book. So, but I'm not giving him pandas. That's just an FYI. So I hope that you didn't hate this video. I hope that you learned some things or listened to some different perspectives or looked at the situation a bit differently. Or maybe you didn't and you still disagree, and that's fine too. Maybe you just found me entertaining, which is all I can hope for. And I really, really hope that you're gonna come back next time. So book friends, until the next one, which is gonna be very soon, I'll see you later.